It's actually the best date I've ever been on.
Hello. Imagine a pitch-black night enveloping everything. A scene where a three-eyed monster, drenched in fresh blood, glides through the village like a gust of wind, sowing death in its wake. In just one night, 30 lives were brutally snatched away. This horrific massacre is considered one of the bloodiest and most terrifying events in Japan's modern criminal history. It unfolded on a calm late spring, early summer night, when a 21-year-old named Miyo Choi, wearing two flashlights strapped backward on his head and a massive bicycle lamp across his chest, armed with a hunting rifle and a traditional Japanese katana at his side, roamed the streets. He looked like a savage beast, darting through every corner and alley between the villages of Kaoma and Hanamura. House by house, he knocked on doors, and behind each one awaited a scene of carnage. That night became one of the most terrifying in Japan's criminal records, the Tsuyama Massacre, a case that still haunts the nation to this day. So what drove Miyo Choi to such cruelty? Let's rewind to 1917 and uncover the tragic story behind this chilling figure. Our tale begins in Okayama, a prefecture in the southwestern corner of Japan's Honshu Island. It borders Hyogo to the east, Hiroshima to the west, the Seto Inland Sea to the south, and Tottori to the north. Located in the Chugoku region, Okayama boasts well-developed transportation infrastructure and a warm climate, earning it the nickname Land of Sunshine for its many clear, sunny days. On March 9, 1917, Miyo Choi was born into a wealthy family in Imura, Yamada District, Okayama Prefecture. His grandfather was a prominent and affluent landowner, while his father, a gentleman who had fought in the Russo-Japanese War, supported the household. Miyo had an older sister, Minako, 3 years his senior, and the family lived happily together. But this idyllic life wouldn't last long. Misfortune began piling up from the moment Miyo was born. When Miyo was just 1, his grandfather succumbed to tuberculosis. 5 months later, his father died of the same ruthless disease. The tragedy didn't end there. By the spring of the following year, when Miyo was 2, his mother also fell to tuberculosis and passed away. Whispers spread among the villagers, branding Miyo a bearer of bad luck, a jinx on his family. Worse still, with tuberculosis claiming so many lives in quick succession, the Choi family became outcasts, shunned, and stigmatized. By 1920, Miyo, his sister Minako, and their grandmother were cruelly expelled from the family by their uncles, who seized nearly all their wealth, leaving the trio with only a small patch of fields and forest land. From then on, the three relied on each other to survive. When Miyo turned 6, they moved to his grandmother's ancestral village of Kaoma. There, they bought a house and land, settling in for the long haul. Compared to other villagers, their life was still relatively comfortable. His grandmother worked the fields tirelessly, so Miyo spent much of his childhood playing with Minako. When he reached school age, his grandmother, citing his frail health, refused to let him leave home. Miyo himself had little interest in school either. After much persuasion from the villagers, she reluctantly agreed to send him to a school 4 kilometers away. But because his education had been delayed, Miyo started a year behind his peers. In May 1924, at age 7, he finally stepped in the classroom. However, Miyo was frequently absent for all sorts of reasons, missing over a month each semester. This was largely due to his grandmother's overindulgence. She kept him home at the slightest hint of rain or wind. Despite his spotty attendance, Miyo excelled academically. Teachers praised him as diligent and ambitious, always helping classmates and even serving as class leader. By middle school, his outstanding grades raised hopes among his teachers that he'd pursue higher education. Excited, Miyo shared the news with his grandmother, only to face her furious rejection. The high school was far away, requiring dorm life, and she, feeling her health decline, feared being left alone, especially with Minako nearing marriageable age. She forbade him from going, and despite his disappointment, Miyo gave in. The next day, he somberly told his teachers he wouldn't continue his studies. In 1932, shortly after graduating middle school at 15, Miyo fell ill with a fever. Doctors diagnosed him with meningitis and ordered rest, forbidding heavy work. After 3 months of treatment, his condition improved. But soon after, Minako married and left home. Deeply attached to his sister, his only confidant, Miyo was devastated. Unable to study further, and now, without Minako, he spiraled into despair, locking himself indoors, avoiding peers, and passing time by writing short stories or retelling newspaper tales to the village kids, who adored him for it. In 1935, Japan's government launched the Youth School Initiative to boost education levels, offering vocational training and exams for young graduates. Passing could secure a good job, inspired by a former teacher who remembered his academic promise. Miyo saw a glimmer of hope and threw himself into preparing. But a chance encounter that fall derailed his path. While buying study materials in Tsuyama City, Miyo bumped into Yamauchi, a shady acquaintance from 2 years prior, whom he'd met at a movie theater. Yamauchi, a pimp and thug from Osaka's Ikawa red light district, flirted with Miyo and lured him to a brothel, introducing him to prostitutes. Innocent and inexperienced, Miyo couldn't resist. That night changed him. Back in the village, Miyo became obsessed with chasing young women. But in a small community of just a few households, most ignored him. Word of his reckless behavior spread, bruising his pride. When his advances failed, darker thoughts took root. At the time, rural Japan clung to an odd, ancient custom called yobai, where men could sneak into a woman's home at night for consensual relations, limited to young women or widows. Though banned in most of Japan as society modernized, it lingered in remote areas like Chugoku's villages. Local youth groups, known as wakasuji, made up of unmarried men aged 15 to 16, enforced community rules, patrolled against outsiders, and even guided inexperienced grooms on wedding nights. Membership was a status symbol, but Miyo, isolated, frail, and friendless, didn't qualify. Undeterred, Miyo found another way. He secretly spied on men practicing yobai, learning their habits and the women's vulnerabilities. Using this knowledge, he blackmailed women into sleeping with him. As an educated young man with some money, he wasn't entirely despised, more of a local artistic idol. Many women complied, and he indulged repeatedly. But his reckless lifestyle took a toll. Chest pains and coughing hinted at tuberculosis, terrifying him. Folk remedies failed, and too ashamed to seek help, he hid his symptoms and kept pursuing women, growing arrogant and self-absorbed. In 1937, a mandatory military health exam shattered his ego. Japan, amid its invasion of China, glorified military service. At 20, Miyo hoped for a top-class A rating, a badge of honor. Instead, doctors diagnosed early-stage tuberculosis, rating him Class C, unfit for service. In an era of limited medical knowledge, tuberculosis was a death sentence and a social stain. His pleas for a retest were met with scorn. Word spread fast. His family's history of the disease fueled rumors it was hereditary. Villagers, already wary from his parents' deaths, shunned him completely. Even women he'd been with turned away, some spreading malicious gossip. Overnight, Miyo became a pariah, his pride crushed. Isolated and facing a shortened life, resentment festered, planting the seeds of vengeance. Post-exam, banned from work due to his illness, Miyo obtained a hunting permit and bought a double-barreled shotgun. A year later, he mortgaged his home and land for 600 yen to purchase a semi-automatic Browning shotgun, 12 gauge, 5 rounds, claiming self-defense against wild boars. Theories abound about his intent. Some say he initially just wanted to intimidate gossipers and coerce women. Others argue that after his Class C humiliation, he armed himself against village bullies. Either way, Miyo practiced shooting in the mountains, later parading his gun through Kaoma, intimidating women into submission. His confidence swelled, while fear gripped the village. Even his doting grandmother grew wary. Then, a misunderstanding ignited his rage. On March 9, 1938, his grandmother reported him to the police, claiming he'd poisoned her soup to kill her. In truth, Miyo had secretly mixed a folk remedy into her food to help her frail health, but its odd smell alarmed her. She caught him in the act and panicked. Police cleared it up as a mix-up, but confiscated his hunting permit, guns, and knives. Though the misunderstanding was resolved, Miyo's heart turned to ice. Betrayed by the village and now his grandmother, he secretly rearmed, spending 160 yen on a used Browning shotgun, ammo, and a katana from shops in Osaka, Kobe, and Tokushima. He modified the gun to hold 8 rounds, training in the woods undetected. Village military drills masked the noise. By May 18th, preparations complete, Miyo wrote 2 lengthy confession letters to Minako, burned his notebooks and belongings, and scouted Kaoma by bike, timing how long it'd take villagers to reach the nearest police station. At 5 p.m. on May 20th, he climbed a pole and cut the power lines, plunging Kaoma into darkness, a common wartime occurrence no one questioned. As night fell, villagers returned home, ate dinner, and slept, unaware of the horror looming. At 1:40 a.m. on May 21st, 1938, clad in a black student uniform, tabi socks, and a headband with 2 flashlights, Miyo strapped a bike lamp to his chest, slung a katana and daggers on his belt, and gripped his modified Browning, pocket stuffed with 200 rounds. His first victim, his 80-year-old grandmother. As she slept, he beheaded her with an axe, tossed it aside, and began his rampage. Kaoma's trusting residents rarely locked doors, making his entry effortless. Next, he hit Kishida Kijo's home. Kijo, a classic conscript, was mocked by Miyo's peers. Kijo's mother had slept with Miyo, but cut ties after his diagnosis, spreading rumors. His sister Misa rejected Miyo's yobai advances, mocking him too. Fueled by hate, Miyo slashed Kijo's mother with his katana, then killed Kijo's 2 brothers woken by the noise. Misa was absent, likely at a silkworm house, so he moved on. At Nishikawa Ii's house, Miyo shot Ii's wife, Tamiyo, who'd ended their paid affair and humiliated him publicly. The gunshot roused Ii, their daughter Yoshiko, another ex-lover recently married, and Tamiyo's sister Chizuko. All 3 rushed out and were gunned down. Yoshiko's visit home sealed their fate. Miyo had timed his attack for her return. At Yasuo Ryu's, Miyo had no personal grudge, but Ryu's wife, Kiko, was Nishikawa Ii's daughter. He shot Ryu point blank, then Kiko, 6 months pregnant. Their nephew Kuma, roused by the shots, was bludgeoned with the rifle butt and shot. Ryu's 70-year-old mother, hiding, took a chest wound but survived. Miyo then stormed Joy-Sei's home, targeting Joy Jiko, a classmate he loved. After losing his virginity at the brothel, he pursued Jiko, who rejected him. Tricked into sex before her arranged marriage to Oki Roku, she divorced soon after. Her mother then sent her to a distant village, stoking Miyo's rage. He shot Joy-Sei, then gunned down Jiko's brother Makoto and his wife Saiko as they fled. Sisters Ki and Hanako leapt from a window, but fell to bullets in the hallway. Jiko escaped to Nishikawa Shawa's house. Chasing Jiko, Miyo reached Shawa's locked home. Enraged, he fired at the door but couldn't enter. Shawa's 84-year-old father, Genji, emerged to investigate and was shot twice. Evidence later showed Genji grappled with Miyo, his hand slashed by the katana before dying. At Ki's house, Miyo shot Ki and his mother Tozo. Tozo had taken his money for sex, but ditched him for a richer man, wounding his pride. Both died instantly. At Nishikawa Chihiro's silkworm house, Miyo killed Misa, Kishida Kijo's sister, and Kazu, Oki Roku's sister and Jiko's ex-sister-in-law, plus Chihiro's eldest son. He then shot Chihiro, muttering, "If you hadn't gossiped, I'd have spared you." Crossing fields to Oki Roku's, Jiko's ex, Miyo missed Roku, who fled to alert police. Furious, Miyo shot Roku's 47-year-old mother, taunting, "Your daughter-in-law died by my hand. Now it's your turn." She died later in hospital. At Iku Jawa Muno's, Miyo despised Muno's sister Machiko for mocking him while secretly sleeping with him. She'd fled to Kyoto days earlier, but he slaughtered her parents, wife, and 5-year-old daughter, shooting the child 7 times in the gut. At Kawazo Joy's, a wealthy man Miyo envied for bedding village women, he shot Joy's wife in the arm. She died from blood loss, while Joy hid upstairs. Finally, in Hainamura, Miyo killed Okamoto Kazuo and his wife Yumi Shiro, another ex-lover who'd spurned him after her husband grew suspicious. By 3:20 a.m., police arrived at the blood-soaked village. Miyo had fled to a farmer's house a kilometer away, borrowing paper and pencil from a child he'd once entertained with stories, urging him to study hard before vanishing. The next morning, police found Miyo's body atop a mountain 3.5 kilometers away, overlooking Kaoma. Beside his neatly arranged katana, shotgun, and flashlights lay a suicide note. He'd shot himself in the chest, using his toe on the trigger, 3 hours after the massacre. He'd invaded 11 homes, killed 30 people, and injured 3, including 5 under 16. His confession letters, one found at the scene, another sent to Minako, revealed his mind. "Grandmother, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have killed you," he wrote. "I thought I'd die quietly, but I've done terrible things. Sister, forgive your useless brother. I long to run free in the fields, but for 4 years, since my illness, I've been scorned. This society has no mercy for the sick. I wasn't happy. If there's a next life, I want strength and joy. I did this because Nishikawa Jiko and Yoshiko returned, but Jiko escaped. Sister, kill her. Kawazo Joy, abusing wealth and power, preying on women, had to die. Dawn's coming. I should go." Minako died of tuberculosis in December 1939, over a year later. Okayama's local court compiled a report on the Tsuyama Massacre, stored at Stanford University, blaming Miyo's isolation, abandonment, and the village's coldness for his hatred. Occurring near Tsuyama City, it's also called the Tsuyama or Miyo Choi case. Wartime censorship muted initial press coverage to avoid unrest, abbreviating victims' names. Kaoma, already small, crumbled after losing so many. Many fled, leaving it desolate. Over 80 years later, locals still shudder at its mention. Gravestones from May 21st, 1938 show a year 13. The village, with a round stone marking Miyo's symbolic grave beside his grandmother's. The massacre inspired works like Nabe's Tsuyama 30 Killings and films, reflecting how crushed pride can turn to darkness. Miyo Choi's tale ends here, a horrifying tragedy staining a peaceful village. From a pampered rich boy to a death-dealing monster, what changed him? Was it just the village's rejection, or something deeper? Some see him as a victim of fate, disease, stigma, and an unlucky childhood, orphaned young and cast out by kin. Repeated blows, denied education, spurned love, mocked illness, pushed him to despair. He's pitiable, they argue. Others view him as an unforgivable fiend. No hardship justifies slaughtering 30. Elders, pregnant women, innocent kids included. His selfish, blind rage stripped him of humanity. From a criminological perspective, Miyo wasn't merely a product of circumstance or madness. His antisocial traits, nurtured by indulgence, isolation, and unchecked impulses, fused with a society that ostracized the weak. Tuberculosis didn't just kill his body. Stigma killed his soul, amplifying resentment into carnage. The Tsuyama Massacre mirrors Japan's then issues: disease, discrimination, social inequity, outdated customs. It begs us to foster empathy, not apathy, toward the vulnerable, lest we sow more monsters. Goodbye until next time.